Hey guys, what's going on? It's your boy Luke here for our live stream for Monday Night Football between the Baltimore Ravens and the Indianapolis Colts. I almost call them the Baltimore Colts just because of the history there. Wanted to throw you guys off a little bit, but obviously a lot of history between these teams. Obviously, we have a primetime matchup, but most importantly, these Draftkings contests to try and take down. So what we're going to do here for this live stream is we're going to go over my favorite plays for the slate. So going to go through my Patreon projections page where I have every player, all the ownership on there, everything like that. If you guys want direct access to these projections that you're going to see throughout the live stream, make sure you guys check out my Patreon page. If you're watching the replay, I will have it in the description for you guys so you can get access for not just my projections for this game, but for all the games for this week, for next week as well, and our main slate. So tons of stuff on there for you guys, tons of data. And this will be a little bit of a sneak peek if you're not already a member. But anyways, with all that out of the way, let's hop right into the picks here for this week. So you can see as of right now, obviously, we're going to start position by position. We're going to go over the guys that I'm actually playing this week. If there's any major fades, we'll go over those as well. And I'll remind you guys, if you have any questions, go ahead and feel free to put them down in chat. I'll get to them as soon as I see them. We may get a break in these projections and whatnot. So starting off things here with Lamar Jackson, let's go ahead and talk about the best play on this slate. You can see as of right now projected for over 22 points, nearly 23. And at the captain slot, he's almost a must play. So as of right now, expected to be owned at about 22.1% of captain slots. And really got to make a decision with Lamar Jackson. You're either going to play a ton of them at the captain slot or probably play none at all. There's not many ways to go around 20, 30% at the field with Lamar Jackson at captain and still have enough leverage for DFS contests, that kind of thing. So make sure you guys keep that in mind. For me, I'm going to have Lamar Jackson in at least 75% of my captain slots for tonight. He's somebody who, when he's on a slate for a single game slate, he ends up being the optimal captain over 84% of the time. That is the highest of any player in the entire NFL. Obviously, a lot smaller of a sample size than many of the players that we have included in this analysis. But important to note, somebody who is essentially the one-man show for the Ravens is going to get a ton of passing production, probably going to run for 70 or 80 yards, and of course, has tons of bonus upside. Talk about Carson Wentz a little bit. You can see he does make my player pool, but I'm only going to have very scarce amounts of him. Somebody who I'm not huge on tonight. You can see I have him right now for a 17.4 point projection. And while the price tag's okay, he's only $10,200. When I'm running my optimal sims, when I'm taking a look at what percentage of the time he ends up optimal, for me, it's right around 18%. And as of right now, that is much lower than what he's being owned at. He's being owned at a 70% clip. You can see in the captain slot, I have him as optimal play just 5.5% of the time. So that is nearly half of what he's actually being owned, which is typically a clear fade spot. But anytime you have a quarterback on a showdown slate, it is an extremely risky proposition to full on fade them. It's actually quite dumb, to be quite honest with you. There's almost no way to rationalize it. So we are still going to have Carson Wentz, but I'm definitely going to have well less than the field, especially since I'm buying so heavily in on Lamar Jackson. Let's talk about a few of these running backs. I definitely love targeting the running back position on this slate. I mean, obviously, with the Ravens side of things, we have the biggest running attack in the entire NFL, a team that runs it more than just about anyone else. And while I like that, they have so many hands to feed there. I mean, they have Lamar Jackson first off and foremost. And on top of Lamar Jackson, we also have guys like Latavius Murray, Le'Veon Bell, Devonta Freeman, and even Tyson Williams. So for me, it's much harder to get a grasp on who's going to score that touchdown, who's going to get those 50, 60 yards tonight. So you can see I'm kind of scattershotting. So we're playing Tyson Williams. I don't think Le'Veon Bell is going to be the guy to get that touchdown or anything like that. He's being used a little bit more as like a third down specialist, somebody that can catch balls out of the backfield, that kind of thing, can block as well. Tyson Williams getting a lot more carries, a lot more, we'll say, regular work in this offense. Same thing with Latavius Murray. Obviously, he's their primary running back, I'd say. The guy they're using a majority of the time on first and second down, but he's almost six times more expensive than Tyson Williams. Do I think that there's going to be a 6 times increase in workload? Absolutely not, right? Tyson Williams is probably going to give out 8 to 10 carries in this game. Latavius Murray, you're probably looking around 15 to 16 carries. Obviously, in Showdown, we're only dealing with a single game slate. You can't really look at it in a binary fashion like that. We can't go, is he going to score 6 times as many points? Because there's just so many points to go around, right? If it were a 13 or a 14 game slate, that kind of thing, we could do that. But as a result, I'm scattershotting the Ravens at running back. I'm much more excited about the Indianapolis side of things, though. So in terms of Jonathan Taylor, he's probably my favorite play on the entire slate outside Lamar Jackson. So you can see as of right now projected for 16.8 points, but he has a much higher ceiling than that. He's somebody who can go out, score 1 or 2 touchdowns, you catch 5 or 6 balls out of the backfield, get you that 100 yards and a bonus, and get nearly 30 fantasy points. So if I'm not going to play Lamar Jackson at captain, it is almost surely, and it's probably about 75% Lamar Jackson at captain, probably playing about 20% Jonathan Taylor, and that rest 5% is going to be scattered on some of the cheaper options on the slate just because I'm so bullish on those two players. Their optimal percentages at captain heavily outweigh everyone else on the slate. It's not even close. So for me, especially on this slate, going to be a little bit more concentrated than usual at the captain slot. Let's talk about a few other options down here. Devontae Freeman, if you really want to get cute, he's gotten quite a few targets out of the backfield for the Ravens, even though he's seen by far the least amount of snaps of any of these running backs. This is a showdown slate, and he's $400, right? So if he goes out there, he catches 2 or 3 balls, scores a touchdown, that is more than enough room to pay off Devontae Freeman's salary tag. So somebody who, as of right, I had him as a no earlier on the day. As the day has gone on, he's actually became a yes. I meant to update that. So yeah, he's somebody I'll play, at $400. There's a few other really cheap options I like on the slate. So this Bateman, by the way, guys, I meant to update this as well. He has been marked out. So he's somebody who's been practicing for the last 3 weeks for the Ravens. He's only $200. So that would have been a hell of a value play right there, but not going to be playing, unfortunately. So let's go through some of the wide receivers, though. Marquis Brown is the worst play I've seen in Showdown in quite some time. I'm just going to leave it at he's $11,000. It makes no fucking sense. Do not play Marquis Brown. That is the dumbest price I've seen in quite some time. Let's talk about a few of the other options you can go to, though. I definitely like Sammy Watkins a whole of a hell lot more. He's almost half the price of Marquis Brown. Tell me in what world that makes remote sense. It just does not. I'm projected for 14 points. You can see Marquis Brown for 16.6. Obviously, that 2.5 point difference is not worth the $4,500 increase. So I definitely like Sammy Watkins a lot more. Again, he's not a very high ceiling player, somebody who's a little bit capped in that department, but really like the price tag difference there. Michael Pittman's my best wide receiver on the slate, so obviously not projected for as many points as Marquise Brown, but he's $2,000 cheaper. I mean, again, in what world does that make sense? Michael Pittman Jr. to this point has been almost as effective as Marquise Brown, despite having a lot more targets around him, a lot less targets to go his way. He's been more productive with those targets. He's had a much higher catch percentage, much more touchdowns, everything like that. So Michael Pittman Jr., also a dark horse pick for captain, probably somebody I'm going to sprinkle in around the 5% mark, but the rest of my captain lineups. So really like him right there. He's somebody who has the highest potential of anybody on this Indianapolis team outside Jonathan Taylor. Let's talk about a few other of the cheaper options here. Devin Duvernay, you could play if you really wanted to. I'm not going to have him on the slate. He's a very high upside player just because of his athletic ability, somebody who could take a 5-yard catch and turn it into an 80-yard touchdown at essentially any point. Let's talk about some of these tight ends down here. Mark Andrews made my core plays from earlier on in the week. I like the price tag at $6,600. Again, he's almost $5,000 cheaper than Marquise Brown. And I don't mean to hammer this home too much, but whoever made the pricing for Draftkings, like the intern, whoever had to have been high or something like that. Makes literally zero sense. I cannot describe this enough. It's just way off. Let's talk about a few of the other options down here. So you have Jack Doyle, Mo Alley Cox. They're all right. They kind of eat into each other's production. Obviously, both tight ends for that team. But the Colts love to use 2 tight end sets. They love using them both in the red zone as well. And while I wouldn't play Cox and Doyle together, I definitely like including one of them into a lineup just because of their price tag. They're relatively cheap. They open up quite a bit of flexibility up top. Let's talk about the defenses. I like going to the Ravens side of things just because Carson Wentz kind of looks like a dumpster fire to this point of the year. He's putting up a ton of interceptions, a ton of fumbles as well. And somebody who typically doesn't throw for 300, 400 yards. So really like the matchup with the Ravens. I don't really like going to the Colts side of things just because they're going to be a little bit more chalky. I'm expecting just about the same amount of ownership as the Ravens. And I definitely think they have much less upside. The kickers, I love on this slate. So because this is definitely supposed to be one of the lower scoring games, especially of the primetime games for this week, if you take a look at these offenses, they're run centric, right? So they're teams that when they tend to get down in the red zone, when teams stack the box against them, at times they have a hard time scoring. So Justin Tucker to this point has been very productive as a fantasy wide receiver. Kicker. We've seen that. Robert Blankenship, same kind of story, right? Somebody who is one of the best kickers in the entire NFL. So don't hate going to either of those options. And what we're going to do to wrap this up, because I'm not going to take too much time with this live stream here. Again, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them down in the chat before we get on out of here. So I just want to talk about a few of the game flows that I expect for tonight. And this is by far the most important part of this video because I can talk about these median projections all I want, right? We can talk about Lamar Jackson's median score is 22.8, and I calculate that using my analytical approach. Sure, that's great. but the median projections almost never come out to be reality, right? There's just different game flows that can happen. You can have a team get ahead by 2-3 touchdowns, completely change the play calling, or vice versa. You can be down 2 or 3 touchdowns and have a completely different set of players on the field. So let's talk about a few of the game flows that I like for tonight. Let's go through a question before we do that, just because it'll be a different part of the video. So Gayasi Armstrong says, do we trust Carson tonight? Kind of scared of him twisting both ankles running the ball tonight. So hell of a lot. Yeah, man, that's what I was just saying. So with Chris Carson, he's very turnover prone, right? See, somebody who I only have in my player pool just because it's almost foolish to fade these quarterbacks in showdown, just because they go out there, they score 2 or 3 touchdowns. They don't really have to do a whole hell of a lot to pay off, but I'm right there with you, man. Somebody who is very much turnover prone, somebody who isn't very careful with the football. You can definitely help out that defense. So I don't hate going to that Ravens defense, like I was mentioning before, just for that reason. They could put up some touchdowns on defense. They could get a few nasty fumbles, something like that. And again, Carson Wentz also not healthy right now, somebody who's dealing with quite a few injuries. So that's definitely something to keep in mind as well. Let's talk about a few of the game flows, though. Again, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them down in the chat. I'll get to them when I see them there. But the first game flow I want to consider, it's the obvious one. This is a 7.5-point spread for the Ravens. They're the home team. They're also going against a banged up Indy team. So we have legit blowout risk right here. There's a chance that the Ravens get ahead by 20, 24 points at halftime and go to a very much so run-centric affair. And in those type of game scripts where the Ravens are going to score a ton of points, first of all, like going to a 5-1 split between the Ravens and Colts. It's a little bit aggressive for most slates, but given the fact that Carson Wentz and that Indy offense has looked pretty atrocious to this point, I think it's a little bit more viable than most weeks. Let's talk about a few of the targets in a onslaught for the Ravens. First and foremost, I'm okay with going with 2 running backs in those type of situations, right? So if we're talking about just a straight 3-3 or a 4-2 split, using 2 running backs for the Ravens and Lamar Jackson is a little bit foolish. I mean, obviously, using 3 rushers for a team, and again, I'm considering Lamar Jackson as a rusher in one of these massive upside games. There's just not enough rushing production to go around, right? But if we're dealing with a game where they're going to be up by 2-3 touchdowns, that kind of thing, there isn't more than enough room for them to pay that off. So in a 5-1 split, I'm okay with going to people like Latavius Murray, even Tyson Williams in the same lineup. You can go with somebody like Devonta Freeman, who does it a little bit more with his PPR upside, mix up with Latavius Murray or even a Le'Veon Bell if you want to get really, really unique. But my least favorite of the bunch is definitely Le'Veon Bell. I'm trying to stick with Latavius Murray, Tyson Williams, and Devonta Freeman. But again, if you're really trying to get unique, you can see one of the lowest owned of the bunch is Le'Veon Bell. So you could definitely take that route. Let's talk about a few guys that would be avoiding in a Ravens onslaught. So first and foremost would be the wide receivers for the Ravens. So to begin with, they're not one of the more productive teams passing the ball, but especially so if they're winning by 2 or 3 touchdowns. And while it could be the case that they've caught 2 or 3 long touchdowns through the air, and that's why they're ahead by 2 or 3 touchdowns, in the second half, they're going to be losing a lot of that PPR upside. So Marquis Brown, already somebody I hate on this slate, even more so in that type of an onslaught. I'd be okay with going to somebody like Paris Campbell, especially on the Indianapolis side of things, as the one buyback for that, just because he's, first of all, cheap enough to do so. He's only $3,800, but he's also somebody who's extremely good after the catch. He has big play upside every time he gets the ball in his hands, and that's the kind of thing I'm looking for in an onslaught type of game. I mean, in that game, we're expecting Indy to probably score 7 to maybe 20 points at the very most. So you're looking for that person that goes out there and gets you that massive play, because that could very well be the only fantasy production we find from the team that is being in an onslaught. A few other guys we could target in an onslaught, right? Ravens defense. It could be a defensive touchdown that gets them out to such a big lead. Again, only $4,400. So in that type of a game flow, very advantageous. We could talk about Justin Tucker or Robert Blankenship. Perhaps the reason the Colts end up getting killed tonight is because they can't score touchdowns. They keep getting down into the red zone. They still end up getting a good amount of yardage with somebody like Taylor. So if you're going to run it back with Blankenship, I don't like it in a 5-1. I'd much rather it be a 4-2 split between the Ravens and Colts, using somebody like Michael Pittman Jr., using somebody like a Jonathan Taylor, and matching them up with a Blankenship. So that would be it for the Ravens onslaught. But by far the more interesting scenario, the one that I'm going to be building a majority of my lineups around, it's a little bit contrarian. It's, what if the Colts get out to a big lead this week? This is a competitive game. That is well within the reason, the cards right here. I mean, these two teams relatively competitive. I mean, you see that large spread for the Colts as of right now, but I'm not necessarily bought in on that. The Ravens are dealing with some of the most injuries of anyone in the NFL. At last count, beginning of this week, they had 35 players, either questionable, probable, or on IR. 35 players, and they're 7.5 point favorites. I don't necessarily get that, right? So I think it's much closer to something like a 3, maybe even 3.5 point spread. So I'm definitely going to be playing lineups with a little bit of a close game flow here. So talking about a few of my favorite targets, first and foremost, Lamar Jackson becomes even more valuable. In close games, Lamar Jackson's not only getting you a ton of rushing upside, but likely going to get you plenty of concentrated offense as well. They're not going to be sharing the ball a whole lot if they need to win the game. Lamar Jackson is their option one, their option two, probably their option number 3 as well. So in a close game, I like going to Lamar Jackson at captain. So just because the Colts have a good game doesn't mean that I'm deviating from him at captain at all. A few of the guys I like to match up on the other side of things, though, I kind of like avoiding Carson Wentz. So most people in this situation, if they expect the game to be close, are going to lean on Carson Wentz. And the issue with playing Lamar at captain and then Carson Wentz in your lineup is you have almost no salary for the rest of your positions. You have $20,000 for 4 spots, and it's almost impossible to pay up for people like Jonathan Taylor or for people like Michael Pittman Jr. or Zach Pascal, people I really like on this slate. So definitely not one of the strategies I'll be using. So the people I'll be using in that closer type of game flow, Jonathan Taylor would be option number 1 for me. I mean, obviously, this team a little bit less productive through the air. We've already been over that here in the video. Jonathan Taylor, one of my favorite plays in the slate. So obviously like going there. I also like using Nyheim Hines even with Jonathan Taylor. So Nyheim Hines was questionable earlier on the week. He's a little bit banged up. So I don't expect him to get the usual 12, maybe 13 touches that he sees week in and week out. But somebody who has a ton of PPR upside, catches a ton of balls out of the backfield, also readily used in the red zone. And I think a lot of people expect Jonathan Taylor to get all of the red zone usage. That's just not the case. They use Nyheim Hines to not only change things up, to keep the defense on their heels. He's also a much better blocker than Jonathan Taylor, a little bit more technical, better at picking up blitzes, that kind of thing. So Nyheim Hines definitely has touchdown upside as well as PPR upside. And in a relatively close fare, I don't even hate using both of them together. Definitely some of the wide receivers I love going to in this type of situation. It's going to be a close game. Michael Pittman Jr. is likely having a massive day. You can even go to him at captain if you don't like going to Lamar, if you need a little bit of that salary savings. Obviously, nearly a $5,000 difference. You can see 18.9, 13.5 in terms of their captain prices. So opens up quite a bit of flexibility there. I like going to the tight ends in a close game. Somebody like Mo Alley Cox or Jack Doyle as a buyback. Definitely avoiding the defenses in a close game. In a close game, we're expecting this to probably get closer to 50-point over-under. I don't expect this to be like a 14-17 type game. If it's going to be close, it's going to be a relatively good amount of scoring. Let's go over a few questions we have in the chat now that I see them down here. So Matthew Jones says, what is the best way to approach multiplayer tourneys? More like cash or more like single entry tourneys? So multiplier. So misspoke there. Sorry, guys. Multiplier tourneys. It's more like cash or more like single entry GPPs. I definitely say more like cash, right? So you're dealing with a little bit more of a flat payout structure when you're dealing with a multiplier tournament. So I play it a little bit more like cash. Hopefully that answers your question right there. I don't play many multiplier tournaments to begin with, though, so I don't want to go too much into that just because I'm not an expert myself. Let's talk about smaller field multiple. Yeah, sorry. Good question. And Josh Oliver sneaking in the red zone. Yeah, man, you hit that on the head right there. You can see this down here. I listed him at $200. He's the dead minimum, right? He's somebody who plays in those 2 tight end sets. Definitely agree with you there, man. That is a sharp comment, by the way. If there's no other questions in the chat, guys, we're going to go ahead and get on out of here so we can start making our lineups and whatnot. But I appreciate everyone for stopping by that was able to make it for this live stream. We're going to have a live stream going for Thursday Night Football this week. It is also going to be at 6 p.m. So same time that you guys tuned in for this one. We're also going to have it for Sunday Night Football as well as Monday Night Football. So something we're adding to the content schedule here. Not going to be long streams or anything like that. You can see we're just approaching the 20-minute mark for this video, but really hope it helps. Again, if you guys are watching this on replay, the link for the Patreon page will be in the description. It's just $1 for the month. So if you want access to all the projections you saw, I'm going to be updating them up until game time, obviously, making sure that we get the ownership right, making sure we get guys in terms of inactives, that sort of thing. So make sure to check that out. And I do that for every single slate. So it's not just Monday Night Football here. I do my projections for Thursday Night Football, Sunday, the main slate, everything out there. So make sure to join to get access for that. And until next time, see ya. And thank you, Matthew Jones, for stopping by. I appreciate the support. Have a good one, guys. Good luck with your lineups as well.